led to the first federal Antifa terrorism prosecution. We actually had it, finally happened, and later convictions in U.S. history, it says. Now, he adds, quote, U.S. District Judge Mark T. Pittman sentenced ringleader Benjamin Hanel Song to 100 years in prison, meaning it says Song was convicted of the most serious offenses in the case, including attempted murder and discharging a firearm in furtherance of a crime of violence. You know, it's that prosecutors proved at trial that he shot Alvarado Police Lieutenant Thomas Gross in the neck during the 4th of July attack last year. Shot a police officer in the neck. Now it adds this, quote, the jury, right, found the defendants guilty of offenses including providing material support to terrorists, which is a big thing, by the way, because remember, the nature of a terrorism charge or of a terrorism designation is not just like, okay, you know, blow yourself up with like a vest or something, and you're a terrorist. No. It includes if you supported a terrorist. They've actually been charged with providing material support to terrorists. Now, why does that matter? A single prosecution laying down a definition spreads, okay? You now have a terrorist designation of an Antifa cell, meaning anybody who gave material support to these terrorists could be charged by extension because they provided material support to terrorists. The case might not end here, in other words.
Yeah, hear that,
so if
George
you have a terror
Soros?
cell getting money from various NGOs, billionaires, foreign billionaires, you know, your local community organizer supporting a terrorist cell of convicted terrorists, that is also a crime. Now, that means that these groups are going to have to either distance themselves from the Antifa terrorists or risk going to prison themselves for, again, providing material support to terrorists. They were also charged with rioting, conspiracy involving explosives, and also other related crimes. It adds this as well, quote, the trial featured extensive evidence regarding the group's ideology, right, anti-fascist action, planning, and preparation for the attack. Now, basically, it's interesting they had to bring up the ideology, okay? This is why the ideology matters. Because when Trump made his designation of, you know, Antifa as a terrorist group, right, you have to designate certain organizations. So they designated, for example, various branches of Antifa with international ties, which allow them to call it a transnational terrorist organization. What unites these organizations is actually they do have shared ideology, they have shared operations, and they have shared financial support, especially when it comes to like anti-fascist action, which, if you haven't seen it yet, I did a whole feature on it on the Josh Phillips show, explaining how the whole network works and the history of it. Anti-fascist action in Germany is kind of like the mothership, you know, so to speak, of Antifa. They're the one that kind of like holds they're the glue that holds it together. Other branches in the UK, very powerful as well, also within this organization. Various groups give them finances. A lot of it takes place through like tiered structures. And there's a bit of a fungible nature to this, you could say as well. Where, for example, you know, there could be a foreign Chinese billionaire giving money to like a far-left NGO or political group, which happens, right? What happens is this. These organizations oftentimes, not these ones exactly, but organizations like this, within the same network though, they start up tiered, like lower tiered organizations based on certain issues. So if the news has mass migration is a big issue today, they'll start up, you know, a pro-mass migration like NGO or nonprofit, and then they will start agitating on it. They'll start up Free Palestine became a thing. They started up a Free Palestine movement. The anti-ICE thing became a thing. They started up an anti-ICE movement. When Black Lives Matter was a thing, they were starting up different factions of BLM. And so popular movements, which they can subvert and alter the trajectory of. They can overtake an organization or a movement and steer it in their direction. That's what these organizations do. What you'll end up having is this. These organizations get money, right? Because people ask, how are they funded? How does the thing work? Let me explain, okay? These organizations get money. These organizations are not violent, typically, but they have elements within them that are often violent, right? And so they will have employees, they will pay people, they're getting money from foreign billionaires, there's money flowing into it. You have a guy, they get a job with these organizations. They get paid through it, it pays their bills, everything else. But in their free time, or maybe they get paid and they don't do anything, they become agitators. And so the organization has an element of plausible, even though they serve the interest of the movement, the organization itself has plausible deniability. Well, look, the guy's crazy, who are we to say what he does in his free time? That kind of thing. Which is why when James O'Keefe, with O'Keefe Media Group, formerly Project Veritas, they actually infiltrated the chats of Antifa, and they have tons of far-left organizations. It's almost entirely left-wing, okay? It is partisan. But it's almost entirely far-left organizations, including major ones, where members of these groups are active Antifa members. So they're working through the nexus of NGOs, nonprofits, grassroots organizations on the far left.
SDA.
And in addition to their activities on that, they're involved in radicalism. They're involved in riots. They're involved in violence. They're involved in training. They're involved in legal representation, material support for terrorist organizations in this case. And that's how the organization works. Again, back to my main point with this, though. What makes this important is now you actually have terrorism charges and charges of providing material support to a terrorist organization. That means anybody who is giving material support to these networks, and there's a lot of them, risk facing criminal charges as well, because we just saw this happen. And the charges, the sentences, I shouldn't say charges, the sentences, the prison sentences this group of Antifa members just got is crazy. I mean, justified in my opinion, but crazy. 100 years in prison, 30 to life, this is a huge thing. On another topic, those who've been watching Crossroads for a while know about our discussions. Why is rent so dang high? And now guess what? The White House is showing how deportations are having the effect of lowering rents. We'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break. The White House is showing how deportations are having the effect of lowering rents. So we're talking about rents in the United States and the cost of living. I mentioned that Trump is basically saying the same thing a lot of the socialists are saying. We're going to lower your cost of living. The difference is in the solution. And one of the things happening right now is that the Trump administration is doing they're doing a victory lap. They're saying the policies we have on, against mass migration is having the effect of lowering rents. The White House press poll is saying this: President Donald J. Trump's decisive enforcement of America's immigration laws is producing real results for hardworking families, including the nation's 46 million renters. It says rents are falling sharply across the country for the first time in years as the record surge in illegal immigration has been reversed.
How much
it adds
for
that
the,
rents in major metro areas have dropped significantly from their Biden-era peaks. It says in many cities, these declines mean hundreds of dollars back into family budgets every month, relief that was impossible under policies that flooded communities with millions of new arrivals. In other words, it's what I was telling you. In Canada and in other countries, this is a normal, non-controversial part of the debate on mass migration. Supply and demand. If you have 10 houses and 100 people competing for 10 houses, those landlords or investment firms or banks that control those houses can charge you whatever the heck they want. If you flood New York City with 10,000 people a week like they were doing, and people are already stuffed into small apartments, and there's already not enough housing to go around, and you bring in 10,000 people a week in a place that under its law requires you to provide housing, what's going to happen? Rent is going to go through the roof. If you bring 10 million people into a country and put them into highly densely populated areas, not the countrysides where a lot of these people don't want to live, You put them in the populated areas because they have access to all the services and resources and everything else that give them all the free stuff. You're going to create higher competition for a finite, limited resource. In Canada, this is the cause of high rent. Mass migration, foreign buying of homes, and policies that restrict the construction of new homes. Competition, high demand, low supply. Obviously, prices go up. I've been saying that this will happen in the United States with deportations, that rent will go down. Rent will go down. And you're now seeing this. Let me show you.
The White House press will says
the driver is clear. President Trump's border policies are working. Net international migration collapsed more than 50% nationally in 2025, which is not a lot, in my opinion, given how much he had under Biden, but still. It says the sharpest drop on record, easing the crushing pressure on housing created by Biden's open border disaster. It says with far fewer new arrivals competing for housing, as I said, vacancy rates have risen and landlords are now forced to compete on price. It adds this, though. President Trump promised to secure the border, enforce the law, and put American families first, and the data proves he is keeping that promise. It says lower rents, less strain on schools and hospitals, because every kid has to be put up in public school, and hospitals have to give care. They can't deny care if you go to the emergency room, and a lot of illegals just take advantage of that. And it says, and more breathing room in communities across the country are the direct result of ending the previous administration's open border disaster. I was saying rent is going to go down as the issue of supply and demand is eased. There's other factors to it. The other big factor, another big one, is the limit on new construction. And part of that is to blame on COVID. COVID actually damaged the ability of people to build new homes. Developers, construction workers, they were on lockdown. They were not essential, I guess you could say, which was a stupid narrative, but that's what it was. And so the construction of new homes was limited at a time when they were bringing in, 10 million people, right? That created a huge problem on supply and demand. When people were foreclosing, when people couldn't afford their homes anymore, when people were offered a lot of money, they were selling the homes, they were having to file for bankruptcy, they were losing their homes. The banks were buying the homes, or investment firms were buying the homes. On that front, Trump, you have an issue now of this, kind of rental economy where everybody rents everything. Everything is a live service. You own nothing and you're going to be happy, right? Maybe not so happy, but you're not going to own anything. You're not going to own your home because it's a rental. You're not going to own your car because it's a rental. You're not going to own your movies or your video games or any digital products because you're not even buying them. You're buying a license to rent them. It's all rentals. You're not going to own access to any of your online services or online software because they're all rentals. They're all an annual subscription. You're not going to own anything because everything is a rental or a subscription service with live service. That's the way the world was heading. Trump came out and said, America will not be a country of renters. We want to have homeowners and so on the home front. And he now has actually an executive order, and he's calling on Congress to make it law, a policy to limit the ability of banks and large investment firms to buy single-family homes. Congress is now passing that. That actually did go through. Any day now, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, Trump is expected to sign that bill. The caveat to that is that it was a few teeth were taken out, okay, in the process of Congress passing it. And so it's not as strong as it was initially, but it will have an effect. And that will also discourage banks and private equity firms and investment firms and some of the big ones from buying single-family homes and treating the homes as investment properties rather than a place to live. Why does that matter? If you're treating a home as an investment, you want the value of that investment to increase. Meaning, how do you do that? You push for policies to limit the creation of new supply, meaning do not build new homes, change zoning laws to discourage the creation of new single-family homes, which they're doing, and also increase demand where you encourage mass migration. So you can artificially raise the value of your assets by lobbying for no new construction, more red tape, zoning laws to prevent new construction, and also mass migration to create demand for the product you have, thereby driving up the investment, right? Driving up the value of the investment. By doing this, they're discouraging that process, and that's a very big deal, actually. It's a very big deal. I will go over the final bill once it's signed. I will be covering it on this show because I think it's a very big topic that is not nearly appreciated enough. If you want to watch some of my deeper analysis, though, I also have a video about why rent is so high on the Josh Phillips Show. So you can watch my video explaining the whole thing if you want to really dig into it. Look, on another topic, we're watching fraud rings, speaking of lack of labor, fraud rings get dismantled. And in a recent case, 455 people have been charged in a $6.5 billion healthcare fraud scheme. Massive amounts of money. We're seeing this like case after case. On this front, J.D. Vance, vice president, he's leading the anti-fraud movement right now, the coalition on it. And they're actually finding enough fraud where it seems that a huge chunk of our taxpayer dollars was literally being stolen by fraud. Let me show you this, Epoch Times. It says the Justice Department announced on June 23rd that it has charged 455 defendants for various healthcare fraud schemes totaling more than $6.5 billion. Yet another fraud scheme. It says the charges unveiled at a press conference in Washington are against defendants for a variety of schemes in what officials called a record-setting action against fraud. And as an FBI Director Kash Patel said, the charges arose from a, quote, new era of investigating fraud. This is a big deal. Because we've been told, my generation, when I get old, maybe I'm already kind of old, I don't know, I don't think I'm that old. When I get older, there's not going to be any social security left for me or my generation. I don't think it's that bad yet, but that's what they've been saying, right? We know that healthcare in the United States is insane. We pay more money for healthcare than most socialist countries. Do you know that? They're talking about socialized healthcare in America. We already pay, through our taxes and through other things like Medicaid and Medicare, more money per person on healthcare than your most far-left, insane socialist countries on earth. And the product we get sucks. We get very poor quality for what we pay, okay? I would argue that America's hospitals are pretty dang good, but the drugs we get, the mass prescriptions, like just the way it's handled sometimes, the amount they charge you for it, it's horrible. You're going to get charged like $50 for a dang lollipop, okay? Like, it's insane. They gouge you. They price gouge you. Part of that is because of our lawsuit culture. Doctors have to have crazy insurance to operate here. Part of it is because of the way that the negotiations and the price setting goes. This is not talked about often. The price setting goes on the back end of establishing prices. Part of it relates to fraud. And I think the issue of fraud can actually change. Going after the fraud, while Trump also goes after the other issues, which he is going after, it will actually change it quite a bit. Now that I've opened this can of worms and explained a few things, the elements I just described being the factors causing high cost of healthcare in the United States are all simultaneously being resolved. One of the issues was international price setting through the pharmaceutical industries and the price negotiating elements, right? Basically, Americans were picking up the tab for the rest of the world. I explained this in an article, in a full video I did on the Josh Phillips Show recently, if you want to watch it. I did a whole episode on it. Americans are picking up the tab to subsidize low cost of medications for Canada, Western Europe, and actually most of the world. And Trump is resolving that by making it so Americans get most favored nation status, meaning of the Western countries, meaning whatever the lowest price paid for medications is within Western Europe or Canada is the price they have to give to Americans. Meaning, Europe and Canada are going to have to start pulling their own weight when it comes to that. Meaning, cost of medications is going to go up a lot in Europe and Canada, and go down in the United States. We're still picking up the tab for the entire developing world and third world. That's not changing, okay? We're still doing it for them. That's going to change. That's going to lower the cost of drugs. Trump has also created Trump RX to sell lower cost drugs, which actually is already working pretty dang well. They're now expanding that. That's a big thing. The other factor they're working on is making hospitals be transparent in pricing, which means that $50 lollipop, they're going to have to tell you ahead of time, and you can say, I will pass on the $50 lollipop. No, thank you. That, when they charge you like, I don't know, what, $500 for an IV bag, whatever they charge, I don't know what they charge for it. They're going to have to tell you ahead of time. And if you can look at prices on the websites of the hospitals, you can shop, and you can go to the one that offers like normal, sane prices. That's going to change that. The third factor is going after fraud and mass migration, whereby illegal aliens get free health care, either directly through certain states because they can't check migration status, because of thanks Obama, because of Obamacare, and also because of them just scamming the emergency room system, but they can't refuse care. Change that. That's going to lower costs. That's already happening. The fourth factor is going to go after fraud, actual fraud. And people defrauding Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of this, there's a lot of healthcare fraud. That will also have the effect of reducing it. So Americans, we've been paying insane amounts of money for a poor product because we're being robbed. That is the reality of it. Well, everyone, that's all for today. Thank you for joining us. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free.